What is going on as far as real estate goes in the state of Alaska? Are we seeing a big crash coming up in the near future here? Are we seeing a slowdown? Are we in fact seeing and going to expect to see actually an increase for the average sold price and the speed of the market? My name is Jamin Goecker. I'm a realtor in South Central Alaska, and my mission is to help you to build an intentional and significant legacy for yourself and your family by coaching you in real estate. And today we're going to be talking about the real estate market, looking at the biggest markets in the entire state, looking specifically at Anchorage, the MatSu Valley, the Kenai Peninsula, and also looking up at Fairbanks. So this gives us a pretty good sampling of the entire, well, not the entire, but most of the big market centers here in the area. Before we get started though, do make sure you get this video a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't done so already. And without further ado, let's go and jump into today's market update. Looking first at Anchorage. The first thing that we see is that the number of properties available in Anchorage is actually down from where it was the year before. And this has really kind of been the trend the past couple of years where we're getting less and less inventory. And that's kind of maintained the same, not nearly as much as what we've seen in previous years, because there was about 460 homes available on the market this time last year. For the month, we had the most up-to-date information, which is July, and now it's about 436. So seeing a bit of a decline, not by as much as what we seen in previous years. The next thing that we see is that the number of properties that actually sold in Anchorage did actually have a pretty big decrease, because it went from roughly about 390 properties that sold this time last year to about 260. So that is a pretty significant drop in the number of properties that have actually sold. We talk about why that probably is in the summary. Now, last but not least, for Anchorage, what we're seeing is the average sold price went from about $424,000 this time last year to about $457,000 this time this year, which means the rate at which we increased has actually gone up since from what we saw the year before. Because last year was about 6.8, now it's a little over 7, mid 7% average price increase. So we're continuing to see an increase in the appreciation. Now, the next market we're going to take a look at is going to be the MatSu Valley, and this primarily is going to be Wasilla, and it's going to be Palmer. Now, this market is unique because unlike Anchorage, we actually have the ability to have a lot of new construction homes coming on in the market. You really don't get that nearly as much as what you get over in Anchorage, and this is really reflective in the numbers. This time last year, it was roughly about 380 homes that were available on the market. Now it's about 520. So we are seeing definitely an uptick, and that really has been the trend for the past year, that we are seeing more inventory on the market this year compared to what we saw in the last year. Now, this is nowhere near what's normal, so we're still really low, but it's a promising trend where we're starting to see more and more inventory popping up in the market here in the MatSu Valley. Now, the next thing we see is that the number of properties that actually sold in the MatSu Valley went from about 240 to just shy of 200 this past year. So kind of the same story as Anchorage, where we are in fact seeing the number of sold properties actually take a bit of a dip from where we saw the year before. The next thing that we're seeing is that the average sold price for residential properties in the MatSu Valley went from about $348,000 this time last year to about $388,000 this time this year, which means the year-over-year increase last year was about 15.5%. Now it's about 11.6%. So we're starting to see a bit of a scaling back at the rate that it's increasing, but that's still a double-digit increase. Okay, that's about $40,000 year-over-year increase for the average sold price here in the MatSu Valley. So that's also a pretty promising trend. Let's go and take a break here real quick. So for those of you who've been watching for a while, you do know that I host a podcast called the Alaskan Journey Podcast. Link for that is going to be in the description section down below. But in that podcast, I actually interview people who've recently moved up here or people who've lived up here for a while, and we talk about their experiences and what it's like actually living up here on the last frontier. So it's not just me explaining stuff to you, it's people telling their stories. So if that's something that would interest you, do make sure you go check that out. Now let's go and switch gears and take a look and see what's going on in the Kenai Peninsula. So looking at the Kenai right now, I've not seen this before. There was exactly 277 properties available on the market this time last year in the Kenai, and this year 277. So not going anywhere as far as inventory goes. Now, where there is a bit of a change, so we saw there was about 103 properties that sold on the market this time last year, and now we're actually sitting about 88. So seeing a bit of a dip in the number of properties that have actually sold compared to the year before. Now, the next thing that we see is that the average sold price in the Kenai Peninsula, just year over year, at least for the month, was about $317,000. the year before, and this year we're actually seeing it's about 347,000. So there is a really aggressive appreciation in the Kenai Peninsula in addition to the MatSu Valley. Last but not least, let's go ahead and take a look and see what's going on up in Fairbanks. So in Fairbanks, we see that the number of properties available on the market this time last year was 52, and now it's 64. So starting to see a kind of a moderate increase in the inventory up there. Unlike the rest of the state, what we're actually seeing is there's an increase in the number of properties that actually sold in Fairbanks. This time last year, there was about 20. This year, 30. So not big numbers either way, but that's still a promising indication if you've been trying to buy a house in Fairbanks for a while. Things are starting to be a little easier to close, apparently. Last but not least, we see that the average sold price in Fairbanks actually increased from about 300, I think it was actually right around 382,000 this time last year, to about 321,000 this year. So what we're actually seeing is there's a very moderate decrease of the appreciation from where we saw the year before. I think it was about 12.7 if I recall correctly. And this year, year to date, what we're seeing is there's actually an 11.6% increase year over year. So where does this leave us for the entire state? Well, across the board, for most of the markets, with some exceptions, is we're seeing that the sales prices are still way up, which that's what we would expect as long as we have the inventory pretty low. And the inventory does remain pretty low across the entire board. I know we have some increases in inventory year over year in places like the MatSu Valley. That's probably more to do with new construction going on out there because there's so much new construction that does happen out here. And that's going to be kind of setting it apart from some of these other markets where it's more difficult to build. So, we would expect that, and we're expecting to continue to see the increase of appreciation. Not expecting a crash anytime soon. Just as long as the inventory remains low and demand still remains pretty high. I know interest rates did go up, but they're not going to go up so much where it just completely craters the market, okay? So I sure hope this is useful for you. If it has been, make sure, again, you give this video a like. And if you do have questions, do make sure you reach out to me. Link to my website is going to be in the description section down below, and I'd love to hear from you.